Poor man found treasure in elephant droppings. What he did next left everyone speechless. There was a smell that would have been more than enough excuse for anyone to turn away and leave. But Caleb didn't leave. Caleb stayed crouched there with his gloves covered in mud, mouth open, holding between his fingers something that made no sense to be in that place. It was a stone, yellow, shining. He turned it slowly. The light of that morning caught it in a way that made his heart jump before his head could understand anything. And Ellie, the elephant he had been cleaning up after for 3 years, was still there behind him, swaying her head from side to side as if the world were completely normal. Nothing was normal. Caleb put the stone in his pants pocket with the speed of someone doing something wrong and knowing it. His heart pounded. He looked to the right, then to the left. The sanctuary was quiet at that hour of the morning, the sun still low, the air heavy with humidity. Derek hadn't arrived yet. Mrs. Eleanor was in the office. He was alone with Ellie and that impossible thing in his pocket. That's when he decided to look at the pile again. He moved it carefully, with an attention he had never given to this task in all the years he'd been there. And what began to appear under the dark gloves was something he couldn't describe to anyone that day. Coins, small, round, the color of old gold, stones in colors he didn't even know the names of. One red like embers, one dark and dense green, one blue that reminded him of the bottom of a river on a sunny day. All there, in that pile, shining as if the world had kept them locked in a safe, waiting for the right moment. Caleb stood so still that Ellie eventually approached him. Her huge trunk came close to his shoulder, and he got such a fright that he fell sitting on the ground. He looked at the elephant. She looked at him. Look, when I learned this part of the story, I stood still for a while before continuing. Because can you imagine? A man crouched on the ground, covered in mud, holding a precious stone in his gloved hand, with an elephant behind him, as if it were the most ordinary day in the world. Caleb Nguyen was 34 years old, and life had never been exactly easy for him. Son of a couple who came from far away seeking work in a strange land, he grew up in a modest neighborhood of a small country town where everyone knew each other and no one had much to spare. He inherited from his father the always messy hair, the almond-shaped eyes, and the quiet way of handling things in silence. He wasn't the type who talked too much. He was the type who watched, thought, and when he spoke, people listened. For 3 years he had been working at Willow Creek Sanctuary, as everyone called the property that Mrs. Eleanor Harrison had set up on a large lot outside town, where she housed animals that had nowhere else to go. Caleb's salary was small, but the work was honest, and he liked Ellie. There was something between the two of them that he couldn't quite explain. That day, after hiding the stones and coins inside the old toolbox that was kept in the shed, Caleb worked the rest of the morning as if nothing had happened. But anyone who looked at him closely would have seen something different. His hands a little less steady, his eyes a little more distant. Derek arrived at 9 with his black coffee in hand and a conversation on the tip of his tongue as always. "You've got a weird look on your face." "I'm fine." "Didn't sleep well?" "No." Derek kept staring at him for a beat longer than necessary, then shrugged and went to attend to his duties. But Caleb felt that look again later when he passed by the shed. It was a look from someone who noticed something had changed and didn't yet know what. That night, Caleb got home with the toolbox in his backpack. Sarah was in the kitchen, her hair tied up, barefoot, stirring a pot. The smell of food filled the small house, the dishes piled up, the window open to the backyard. A simple, honest life. Tight, but theirs. He laid it all out on the table. Sarah turned, looked, and stayed quiet for a time that felt far too long. "What's that?" "It came from Ellie." She blinked. "What do you mean it came from Ellie?" He explained. She listened, and when he finished, she sat down in the nearest chair and stared at the stones with an expression he couldn't quite read at first. "Caleb," her voice was low, "this is worth money. I know. A lot of money." "I know, Sarah." She looked at him. "Then why do you look like you've just found a problem?" And that question hung in the air between them for a moment, because that was exactly what he had found. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, more importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. The next morning, before heading to work, Caleb examined each piece more carefully. He had an old magnifying glass in the drawer, left over from when he did woodworking on weekends, and he went over them one by one. The stones weren't costume jewelry. They were too heavy, had a shine that glass doesn't have, and when he tapped the edge of one of the smallest against the sink, it didn't scratch. It was hard. It was real. But it was on one of the coins that he found what changed everything. On the back of one of the gold pieces, engraved in small time-worn relief, was a crest with 3 initials, H-E-H. He stared at the letters for a long time. 3 letters. Could mean anything, could mean nothing. But they could also mean everything. Caleb went to work thinking about it. During the day, while tending to the animals and doing his usual chores, he kept an eye on Mrs. Eleanor from a distance. The woman's 70 years were well etched on her face and in her posture. Tall, neatly cut white hair, always in a button-down blouse, and fabric pants even in the heat. She walked through the sanctuary like someone who knows every inch of that ground by heart. She had a firm way of speaking that left little room for argument, but her eyes carried something Caleb sometimes noticed in quiet moments. An old sadness, the kind a person learns to bury so deep they almost forget it's there. At the end of the afternoon, he went to the office with an excuse. He needed to sign the supply control sheet. While signing, he tried not to look like he was searching for something. The office walls were covered in old photos, the sanctuary in different eras, and in some photos, an older man with round glasses, arm in arm with Mrs. Eleanor at various points in their lives. "Who's that in the photos, Mrs. Eleanor?" She looked up from the paper, then looked at the photo he was pointing at. "My husband, Harold. He passed away 12 years ago." "He built the sanctuary with you?" "He had the idea. I had the land. He had the dream." Caleb paused. "Mr. Harold, did he like collecting? Stones, things like that?" Mrs. Eleanor stopped. She looked at him differently, a fraction of a second of something he couldn't name. "Why do you ask?" "No particular reason, just curious." She took a moment before answering. Harold had a collection of precious stones. He inherited it from his father, who was a prospector. A lifetime of rare stones, old gold, some ancient coins. A pause. "The collection disappeared about 40 years ago, in a very difficult time in our lives." "Disappeared how?" "That's a question I asked myself for a long time, Caleb." She picked the folder back up, a clear sign the subject was closed. "I never got the answer." He left the office with his heart beating differently than when he entered. H.E.H. Harold Eugene Harrison. Caleb stood in front of the shed, looking out at the horizon where the sun was setting, and felt the weight of those stones in his pocket as if they were bigger than their physical size. 2 days ago he had been a man with nothing more than just enough. Now he was in the middle of a story that was much bigger than him. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She stayed next to Caleb with her eyes open in the dark, and he knew she was calculating. That was how she worked, in silence, rearranging the world in her head. "What if the collection belongs to her by right?" she said into the darkness of the room. "Then we have nothing." "I know. Caleb." Her voice had a mix of exhaustion and fear that he recognized from other tough nights. "How long have we been fighting? You know the car needs fixing. You know the bill at the end of the month is going to be tight. You know we have no savings if anything changes." "I know all that, Sarah." "Then tell me why you can't just put it away and we decide later, calmly." He was quiet. "Because it's not mine," he said at last. The room fell very silent after that. 2 days later, the sanctuary woke up different. Caleb was giving water to the animals when he saw the car parking at the entrance. A car too good for that dirt road. The driver stayed inside for a while before getting out, and when he did, Caleb recognized the type before he knew the person. A man in his mid-40s, well-dressed for an inappropriate place. The walk of someone used to entering places as if the places belonged to him. Derek was the first to reach Caleb. "Who's that?" "I don't know." "Must be her son. I heard her say once that one of her sons might show up someday." Caleb watched the man walking toward the office. Something deep in his stomach tightened. Victor Harrison was 45 years old, with his mother's facial features, but the manner of someone else entirely. He arrived with a loud voice and calculated hugs, and Mrs. Eleanor received him with a warm coldness that only those who knew her well could interpret. She was happy to see her son, but she didn't fully trust this visit. Caleb only learned his name at the end of the day when Mrs. Eleanor formally introduced them. "Victor, these are my employees, Caleb and Derek. They take care of everything around here." Victor shook hands with both of them firmly and with a smile that arrived a second too late. His eyes swept over the sanctuary, the shed, the pasture where Ellie stayed, and when his attention passed over the elephant, Caleb saw something. A look that lasted longer than someone seeing an animal for the first time. It was the look of someone checking something. That night, Caleb barely slept. The next morning, Derek called him aside near the shed. "I know you found something," Derek said without preamble. Caleb looked at him. "What? Don't play that game with me. I saw you putting something in the toolbox 2 days ago, and you've been different ever since. Everyone who knows you can see it." Caleb stayed silent. "If it's something valuable," Derek continued, "we can sort this out between us, without making unnecessary noise." "There's nothing to sort out, Derek." "Caleb, I said there's nothing." Derek stared at him for a moment, then turned and walked away. The atmosphere between them was different for the rest of the day. A tension that both knew was there, but neither mentioned again. What Caleb didn't expect was that on the same day, almost at the end of the afternoon, Victor would come to him alone. There was a calculated manner to it. Victor waited for the moment when Derek had gone to the other side of the property and Mrs. Eleanor was inside the house. Then he appeared unhurried, hands in his pockets, a relaxed smile of someone with plenty of time. "Can I ask you a question?" "Go ahead," Caleb said. "Did you find anything in the last few days, during Ellie's cleanings?" Caleb's heart pounded inside. He showed nothing on his face. He learned that from his father. When you don't know the size of the minefield, you stop and assess before taking any step. "Why are you asking that?" Victor tilted his head slightly. "Because I lost some things here a long time ago. Family things. And I have reason to believe they might have ended up in an unlikely place." "What do you mean, an unlikely place?" "Ellie was young when I left this property. Curious, she ate everything that came her way." Victor gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Young elephants sometimes eat things they shouldn't." Caleb stared at him without blinking. "If you found something," Victor continued, and his tone shifted slightly, became firmer, "the right thing is to hand it over to me. These are family assets. Any property on this land belongs to the legal heirs. That includes me." "And your mother?" A pause. "My mother is a generous woman, but she doesn't understand practical matters. I handle these issues." "I see," Caleb said. "So, do we have a deal?" "I'll think about what you've told me." And he left. I don't know about you, but at this point in the story I was so boiling inside that I had to take a breath before continuing, because there's a specific kind of arrogance that bothers the soul, that of someone who thinks the world should arrange itself the way they want, just because it's always been that way. That night Caleb talked with Sarah until late. He told her everything. The conversation with Mrs. Eleanor about the collection, the initials on the coin, Victor's arrival, what Victor had said. Sarah listened in silence this time. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you think he's the one who hid the things?" "I think so." "And that Mrs. Eleanor doesn't know?" "I'm sure she doesn't." Sarah stood up, went to the window, and stared out at the dark backyard. "Caleb, if you give it to him, we'll be back where we started, with nothing, but at least no trouble." "I can't, Sarah." "But if you give it to her, then it's the right thing." She turned to him. "Right doesn't pay the bills." "I know." He stood up and walked over to her. He put his hand on her shoulder. "But we chose once to live with what's right even when it hurts. I'm not going to change now." She looked at him for a while. Then she closed her eyes and rested her forehead on his shoulder. She didn't say anything else. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us beginners. now continuing. The next day, Caleb arrived earlier. Derek hadn't arrived yet. Victor was at the house with Mrs. Eleanor. The sanctuary was quiet, the sun still trying to pierce the morning fog. Caleb went straight to the office. Mrs. Eleanor was sitting with a cup of black coffee, looking out the window. She looked up when he entered. "Caleb." "Early. I need to talk to you about something serious." She set down the cup slowly. She looked at him with those eyes that held 40 years of history. "Sit down." Caleb sat. He placed the toolbox on the table, opened it. Mrs. Eleanor looked. She stared for what seemed like an endless moment. Her expression wasn't surprise. It was something deeper. It was recognition of someone who has just seen a face they thought they'd never see again. "My God in heaven," she said softly. "They were in Ellie, Mrs. Eleanor. I found them during the cleaning." She picked up one of the coins with a hand that trembled slightly. She turned it, read the initials. H-E-H. Her voice came out thin, as if from far away. "Harold Eugene Harrison," Caleb confirmed. She held the coin for a while without speaking. When she looked up at him, there was a dampness in her eyes that she was clearly trying to hold back. "Where do you think this ended up inside Ellie?" she asked, but it seemed like a part of her already knew. Caleb took a deep breath. "I have a theory, and it involves your son." The silence that followed was heavy. Caleb told her everything he had noticed, how Ellie was young and curious back when Victor still lived there, the kind of animal that tastes everything it finds along the way, how the collection had disappeared during a moment of family conflict, not from any outside theft, how Victor had arrived asking specific questions about the elephant and what she might have swallowed, how he had asked Caleb to deliver the pieces directly to him without involving Mrs. Eleanor. She listened to it all with a stillness that wasn't emptiness. It was weight, the weight of someone confirming what a part of herself had always suspected, but never wanted to know for sure. "He needed money back then," she said when Caleb finished. "We had a big fight over some of his decisions. He wanted his share before it was due. Harold wouldn't agree." A pause that she let linger. Then the collection disappeared. And Victor left 2 months later, said he was going to build his life far from here. "You never talked to him about it." "I never had proof, and a mother doesn't accuse her son without proof." She looked again at the stones scattered across the table. "I've carried that doubt for 40 years. I thought the answer would bring me relief." A longer pause. "But it doesn't. It hurts in a different way, but it still hurts." She remained in the silence for a long moment. Then she looked at Caleb with a clarity he hadn't expected. "You could have walked away with this." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Caleb thought about the answer for a moment. "Because it wasn't mine." She kept looking at him as if seeing something she had been searching for a long time. The conversation with Victor happened that same day in the late afternoon. Mrs. Eleanor called him to the office. Caleb stayed outside, but Victor's voice eventually rose enough for the words to reach him. He denied it, argued, said he was her son, that he had a right, that the collection belonged to the family and family included him, that Caleb was an unscrupulous employee who was distorting things, that he had come in good faith. Mrs. Eleanor answered with a voice Caleb had never heard before, firm and cold at the same time, without anger, but completely unyielding. "You will leave here today. You will go with the clothes you brought, and we won't have to take this anywhere else if you respect that." There was a long silence. "You're choosing that employee over your own son?" "I'm choosing my conscience," she said, "something you could have chosen 40 years ago and didn't." Derek was nearby when Victor left, and Caleb saw on his colleague's face that any hope of getting into this story vanished along with Victor's car, driving away down the dirt road. Later, when the sanctuary was quiet and the sun had fully set, Mrs. Eleanor called Caleb back to the office. The toolbox was still on the table, but there was a sheet of paper beside it. "You've worked here for 3 years," she said. "You do a job that pays far too little for what it's worth. You've never complained, never asked. And you didn't take what wasn't yours, even when it was in your pocket, with no one knowing, and no one would ever know." She slid the paper toward him. "This is a partnership agreement, a quarter of the sanctuary. with rights to participate in decisions and profits. Caleb stared at the paper, unable to speak. Mrs. Eleanor, I can't. You can and you will. She came around to the front of the desk. You gave me back 40 years of doubt in one morning. There's no payment for that. But it's what I have to offer. Caleb looked at the sheet, looked at her. Ellie will be glad to know, he said finally. Mrs. Eleanor let out a short, genuine laugh, one of those that come from a deep place that had been closed off for a long time. She already knows, in her own way. That night, Caleb came home different from any other night in his life. Sarah was in the kitchen again, but this time he walked in, wrapped his arms around her from behind without saying a word, and stayed like that for a while. She understood without needing words. Did it work out? It did. Did you do what you thought was right? I did. She turned in his embrace and looked at him. And was it worth it? He thought about Mrs. Eleanor's face when she saw those coins for the first time in 40 years. About the short laugh that had escaped her. About the note on the table. It was worth more than I expected. Sometimes we go through life thinking that doing the right thing is a path that requires giving up everything, that being honest comes at a cost the world will never repay. And then a story like Caleb's comes along to remind us that it's not always like that, that sometimes the world looks back. Caleb Nguyen didn't get rich overnight. Life doesn't work that way, and if it did, this story wouldn't have the charm it does. What he gained was different, solid ground where there had been sand, and the certainty that when life put him in front of a difficult choice, he chose well. And Ellie kept living her days in the pasture, unaware that she was the one who kept that secret for 40 years and gave it back when the time was right. End of story. And you, in Caleb's shoes, what would you have done? With those stones in your hand, with the bills due at the end of the month and no one knowing? It's one of those questions you only truly answer when you're in the situation, isn't it? Leave in the comments what you thought and where you're watching from. It would be really nice to read that. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel because there are other stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you so much for your company.